You're welcome.
Thanks so much. Just wanted to say, yeah, express gratitude and appreciation for allowing me to join you for the presentation this morning. My name is Rebecca Weaver. I'm the city's program manager for the Nature Conservancy in Missouri. And I'm going to keep things brief so that we have time to get through the tool and leave some room for questions and answers at the end. So for those of you who may not know about the Nature Conservancy, we're a global environmental nonprofit organization, and we work to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. Obviously, that's no small task. For more than 65 years, we've been using science and collaborative, solutions-oriented approaches to tackle the world's toughest environmental challenges. The St. Louis EcoUrban Assessment tool, its origins lie in a model developed out of Bridgeport, Connecticut, where the Nature Conservancy developed a similar approach and methodology to prioritize their urban conservation efforts while also making the approach and analysis publicly available. Obviously, St. Louis is not Bridgeport, and we have very different situations and challenges. The St. Louis EcoUrban Assessment builds off of some of the research in the Environmental Racism in St. Louis report, and we worked alongside community organizations and environmental justice organizers to help shape its creation. We also acknowledge that the study region for the St. Louis EcoUrban Assessment includes the traditional ancestral lands of the Osage, the Miami, the Illinois, the Chickasaw, the Quapaw, Sac and Fox, Shawnee, Oto, Missouri, Iowa, Kickapoo, and the Oglala Lakota tribes. We also acknowledge the enslaved Africans whose unpaid labor built Missouri during the colonial era and beyond, with a legacy that continues to impact the lives of Black Americans today. Through this land acknowledgement, we hope to remind ourselves and our partners of the enduring legacy of colonialism and enslavement, to honor the indigenous peoples and enslaved Africans who have stewarded this land, and approach our conservation work with reverence, respect, and reconciliation in mind. And now I'll turn it over to Julia, and also thank Washington University for providing us with such a great student. It's been an amazing experience to be able to work with Julia. So take it away.
Thank you, Becca. Yeah, again, I'm very excited that we could all come together to talk about this tool. I'm super excited for it to go public and for everyone to be able to share it and use it, and really be able to integrate it into really all of our work with the EES internship program and with Tyson, et cetera. I know also most of us were at the Tyson seminar series on environmental justice a few weeks ago. So this is definitely highly connected to and kind of works with that presentation in a lot of ways. MCU and UCM, the two organizations that spoke, they are featured heavily in this project. We worked closely with them and kind of engaged with them on this tool to make sure that their land and water and air issues were being studied, and so that they can best utilize the tool to create further action and to organize their communities. And so so the tool is super big. There's a lot of data. I'm going to move through it very quickly. Just know that it will be published within the next month or so. And so everyone will be able to, on their own time, go through and utilize it as they please. But for now, I'm kind of going to do a pretty general overview. So I'm going to share the screen. So the tool is kind of really two main components. There's an ArcGIS StoryMap and an interactive mapping component. For those of you who don't know, ArcGIS is Geographic Information Systems, is GIS. It's a mapping and spatial analysis software. It's a very powerful tool. You can basically map and analyze any data on any level. And so for our project, we're looking at the St. Louis region, which we've kind of broken down into St. Louis City and County, and then St. Clair and Madison counties right across the river in Illinois. And so the story map component, this will be a standing link. It'll be on the Nature Conservancy's website, and it tells a story. So with maps and with text and pictures, you'll be able to go through and kind of learn about all of these different environmental challenges, about the different communities affected by those challenges, and the different organizations who are working to make things better in the region. And then I'll talk about the interactive tool when we get there. All of this introduction text Becca kind of went over, so I'm kind of just going to scroll through a lot of it. Real quick, here are the partners that we'd like to thank, the organizations that we engaged with, just to kind of shout them out for a second. But moving along to the maps, which is what I'm here to talk about. So first, of course, like Becca mentioned, we want to really center frontline communities. We don't just want to challenge map as part of this project. We're really interested in actually, lifting up the work of communities who have been most burdened by the environmental challenges. And so with that, we kind of look at two main indicators. We look at block groups, which is a census designated it's usually around a couple thousand people. And so we look at block groups in the region that are majority POC, which we take the census designated racial and ethnic groups for that. And then we also look at block groups that are below the median income for the county, which again varies a lot over the region, but that's why we kind of focus specifically on the individual county. And so the first map here, this is just looking at the POC and the LMI, low to moderate income block groups in comparison. You can see that the trend is really the same for both of those categories. So moving into the environmental challenges, we kind of looked at a few main categories. There are, of course, many other environmental challenges specifically in St. Louis, but these are the ones that, based on our community partners, seem to be the most relevant and the most, working on these issues would be the most effective for the region. And so I'll go through the maps and the factors that were included for each of these categories for the analysis. Okay, so for flood risk, as we know, the region's right on the Mississippi River and some other rivers as well. And so there is a high flood risk in a lot of the region. Right off the bat, that's not the right map. Okay. Sometimes we have to be a little patient with these maps. There's so much data in the story map that sometimes it just is not our friend. Okay, so first we looked at pluvial flooding, which is when rainfall events exceed drainage capacity. So that is not from that. I'll talk about fluvial flooding in a second, which is when rivers overflow, but this is mostly dependent on impervious surface. So for these maps, you can go in and you can see really on a block to block level where exactly there is flood risk in certain events. So the scroll here on this side, this is a 100-year flood event, and then on this side, it's a 500-year flood event. So you can see the difference based on the type of flood event that there is and how important it is to account for both of those types of floods. Also, the data here comes from a predictive model, not a past events model. So this does take into account climate change predictions for the future. Here is that impervious surface map I discussed. So here the gray areas are anywhere that's impervious surface, which again creates a higher risk of pluvial flooding. And so then this map is where those two things intersect. So any area in blue is where there's both impervious surface and a high risk of pluvial flooding. So a lot of area along the river in North City, plus some other areas. Once again, you can go through on your own time and look for specific areas. I'm kind of just showing an overview right now. Okay, so fluvial flooding, this is, I mentioned, when a river exceeds its capacity. So again, a lot of this data is along the rivers. So then we kind of wanted to look at how pluvial and fluvial flooding interact. And so we intersected those areas of flood risk. And this is the same symbology where the areas in blue represent where there's both a risk of fluvial and pluvial flooding. And so that's something that organizations might want to keep in mind when they're creating tools to prevent flooding, green infrastructure, etc. And so this map shows the block groups that are impacted by those areas of intersection, plus block groups that are majority POC and LMI. And so for each of these, you can click and see the populations by rate and by number that are affected by vulnerable flooding. And then so for each of these sections, we also included a project that is already underway or it has been completed in St. Louis that kind of models what we would want partner organizations or really anyone to use this tool for. And so for flood risk, the example is the Green Schoolyards project that TNC has been working on. For this is really just a green infrastructure project, specifically in St. Louis public schools. And so you can read more about that on your own time. All right, so park access and quality. So this section, as we know, cities or parks are very important for mental health, physical health, etc. Obviously, this region spans from urban to suburban to rural, and so there are varying degrees of park access. So we wanted to look at both access and park quality. So this map here shows service areas for parks. So a service area is a modeled, in this case, 10-minute walk time surrounding a park. So every area in yellow is where you would be able to access some park within 10 minutes. The areas in green are parks, of course. But generally overall in this area, you can see, out west in the county, there are some bigger state parks and stuff like that, but most people would not be able to walk to those parks. But then in the city, most of that area is covered by park service areas. So then for looking at park quality, we just focused in on St. Louis City, again, because there are the most amount of parks there, but having a high number of parks doesn't necessarily mean that those parks are well serviced and are effective for the population. And so we used a thesis study by Elizabeth Ward called Assessing Equitable Access to Park Spaces in St. Louis, Missouri. And this was a super detailed assessment of park quality throughout the region. It looked at everything from access, which we talked about via transportation or walking. It looks at amenities, it looks at upkeep, everything like that. You can go in here to the community park audit tool to see exactly what is surveyed for each park. And then you can also go and see the project's executive summary and the breakdown by neighborhood. So the cool thing about this project is that it doesn't look at parks, but it looks at the neighborhood. So it's like, who are the populations that are impacted by poor or good quality parks. And so we wanted to kind of put this analysis in conversation with that service area analysis to see, access in addition to quality. And so here are those service areas with the scores for the park quality assigned to them. And so if you zoom in really close, like let's zoom into WashU here, you can see that areas surrounding WashU, like places you can walk to from WashU, have very high park quality. This is in the highest category of parks, but then, we see the Del Mar divide very clearly here. The parks that are accessed just north of Del Mar are the poorest quality parks. And so here you can also go and look specifically at each of the different categories to see where those park quality areas lie. I should have mentioned this before. For a lot of these maps, you can also address search. So like if you wanted to look at like a specific address and see the data that falls there, you could do that. So that's WashU.
Hey, Julia, quick question. Someone asked a survey, who did the park survey?
Mm-hmm.
So who did the park survey? Yes.
Who did the park survey? Elizabeth Ward. She was a master's student at Michigan State. And this was her thesis for that program.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Cassie, just to add on to that, Elizabeth was in St. Louis when she conducted this, and she went to every park itself to conduct the survey, and also mailed flyers of the survey to surrounding neighbors.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. Okay, so the project example for park access is Peace Park, which I'm sure a lot of you may have heard of. The only neighborhood in St. Louis City that didn't have a park, College Hill, decided to take an area of vacant lots. So all of these dots represent vacant lots, which I'll talk about soon. They took this area right by the Grand Avenue Water Tower, and they essentially created their own park as a community. So here's an artist rendering of that. It is underway and a very exciting project for creating equitable park spaces. Okay, so for air quality, so for this category, we did an intersection method where we took a bunch of different factors and we scored them based on the risk of poor air quality, and then found the areas that had the most factors put together. So we looked at major roads or proximity to major roads and proximity to air pollution sites. We looked at areas with low tree canopy, a high share of youth per block group under 18. We looked at zip codes with high rates of asthma in St. Louis. And then specifically for St. Louis City, we looked at block groups with a high number of demolitions. And so not all of these factors are shown in the story map. You'll be able to look at all of them on the interactive tool. But for the sake of the story map, we're just going to show tree canopy. So this one's kind of similar to the impervious surface map, where every area in green is where there's tree canopy. So again, I'm kind of going to show WashU here. So you can see the areas surrounding WashU. These, we all know these are very wealthy areas, have very high tree canopy. WashU doesn't because there's a lot of landscape. And then just north of Del Mar, again, very stark divide. So asthma rates, this is another one with an extremely stark divide. So here you can see by zip code, and you can click to see what the asthma rate is in a certain zip code. And so those with high rates were included in our intersection. So here is said intersection. So this ended up being a 15-point scale after all of the factors were put together. You can see here, it goes from 0 to 14. And this you can, again, zoom in very close and you can see, you know, around here, there's a very high, this is the highest area for air quality risk in East St. Louis, and along the water in South City and in North City, there's a high risk. And then again, surrounding WashU, very low risk of air quality, air pollution, sorry. And then similarly, we looked at the block groups of these with the highest scores that were also majority POC and LMI. And these are the statistics for that. So the project for the air quality section was the community-based air quality monitoring project. This came up in the Tyson talk, I believe, but this is something that is underway, and this project will hopefully help decide what areas are most important to have those air quality monitoring stations in the future. And hopefully we'll be able to integrate the live monitoring into this project in the future, which would be super cool. All right, food access. So food access, we based a lot of this work off of work by MCE, Missouri Coalition for the Environment. First, we looked at supermarkets and grocery stores in the region. They have a project where they look at general access to those locations, but we wanted to kind of verify that and also highlight what they have deemed as community supported markets, which are the locations with the trees. And so we did a similar to parks, we did a service area analysis surrounding grocery stores, so we could see what communities were able to walk to a grocery store within 10 minutes. We also looked at population statistics in these service areas, which are in orange. We looked at the differences between all supermarkets in the region and just the community supported markets, because those are the ones that likely have locally grown food, potentially healthier options, cheaper options, et cetera. And there was a difference between white and POC communities accessing those locations. And then just to zoom out in the background, the red scale here, that's the project that MCE did based on low income, low access communities. And so the areas in the darkest red, which again, you can see a version of this map on their link here, those have a higher rate of POC communities where there is low access to grocery stores. And then here, so this is directly embedded from their website, so you can go and look at this map at MCE, but this is their food shed map. So this map is also a GIS map, so similar functionality, but here they have locations for urban farms, gardens, restaurants using locally grown food, community markets, all of that kind of stuff. And they have everything mapped. So you can go in directly and see where in your community is where your food shed is impacting you, I guess. And so the project that we wanted to highlight here was Jubilee Community Churches, Oasis Farm. This is a really great urban farm in North City that has an 150,000 gallon underground cistern, which is funded through St. Louis Metropolitan Sewer District. Super cool, would recommend reading more about this farm. All right, so for vacancy, we decided to just highlight in St. Louis City because it's a major problem in St. Louis City, not just because of a declining population, but because of the environmental risks there. Vacancy leads to illegally dumping. It leads to demolitions that fuel vacancy, also lead to air pollution risks, which we talked about a little bit at the beginning. Vacancy is a huge issue, and one that the Vacancy Collaborative, which is a great organization, they are working on mapping this as well, and additionally trying to alleviate some of the issues here. And so this map, just for St. Louis City, this is their vacancy map, which again, they have a version of this on their website, which is linked. And so each of these dots is either a vacant lot, a vacant building, or a possibly vacant lot or building. And then we just summarize that by block groups that you can see exactly where the issue is most prevalent, North City. And then here we're comparing, this is that same vacancy count by block group map compared to the demolitions by block group that we looked at, which were only 2018 to 2020. But again, the trends are very similar there. And here are the vulnerable block groups for the vacancy category. This divide was by far the starkest of any of the categories that we looked at. All right, so moving into looking at the community assets. So this was by far the most important part of the project, because here is where we map organizations that we're working with who are already working on these issues and are going to hopefully use this information to better understand their projects, to create new projects. Also, we want people to come to this map and know where exactly they can go to help work on some of these issues. And so again, acknowledging this is an incomplete list. These are just organizations who we know are doing projects based in these areas. If you would like to learn more about these organizations, you can reach out to them directly, or you can reach out to TNC. So first, we're mapping some of the faith-based organizations. Like I mentioned, we worked very closely with Metropolitan Congregations United, as well as United Congregations of Metro East. Here, those congregations are in like the middle purple and the dark purple. And then the light purple is Growing Green Solutions, which is a TNC seed funding program for congregations who are working on environmental justice issues. And so a lot of these congregations have contact in, not that one. A lot of these have contact information for the congregation if you would like to reach out to them directly as well. So for schools, so we mapped, this is an ever-changing data set, so this might not be completely accurate. We hope it's as accurate as possible, but we mapped school districts and all the schools in the region. But we also worked with Green Schools Quest through the US Green Building Council, which works on, it's essentially like a competition program with schools to be as green as possible. And so any school that currently participates or has participated in that program in the past is in green here. Okay, so Community Builders Network. This is an umbrella organization for community organizations. So here again, you can go in, click, and some of them have contact information or just more details about what that organization does. One of the organizations in CBN is SLACO, which is the umbrella organization of like neighborhood associations and community organizations, specifically in St. Louis City. And so this map just shows every neighborhood that has a neighborhood association affiliated with SLACO. Okay, so that is it for the map component, or the story map component rather. Now we're getting into the interactive tool, which is embedded here, but you can also open it in a new tab if you would like. Sorry, we're working on that. Okay, so this is kind of the piece that we hope organizations will embed in their own projects and put on their websites and have people use however they would like. So I mentioned before, this is kind of where you can look at where the community asset anchor institutions that we worked with overlap with some of the environmental hazards that we discussed. So for example, let's say you wanted to see where MCU and UCM congregations are best served to work on an air pollution issue. So you can go down here and you can look at the air quality intersection, and then you can, here's your legend on the side here where you can see what everything is. You can put together the map however you'd like, and then you can zoom in and see, oh, it looks like this congregation, which is not coming up right now, is in an area that is at a high risk of air pollution. Maybe we should focus some of our air quality actions out of that congregation. So that's just one example. If people want me to show other examples in the chat, I'm happy to do that. Once again, there's an address search here. You can also open all of the tables at the bottom. So like, let's say you wanted to see every single MCU congregation at once, you can go and view it all as a table, see all the contact information, the congregation's website, stuff like that. And you can do that for just about any layer here. Okay, so does anyone have any questions? I have not been looking at the chat, but does anyone have any questions?
We did have one come in earlier, Julia, about someone had a question about what data was used to establish asthma rates.
Yeah, that's a good question. So asthma, we tried to, for most of the data, we tried to, sorry, I'm just scrolling back to that map. For most of it, we tried to go on as small a scale as possible, like a block group level, so that we can have really specific data. Asthma rates, due to HIPAA, you can only look at it on the zip code level. And so Policy Map, which is a mapping tool that the WashU library has a subscription to, they have an asthma rate measure, which is adults reporting to have asthma. A lot of organizations will also look at it in terms of like hospitalizations, or they'll look specifically at youth rates. The adults reporting was the data that we found to be like most reliable for the whole region. But we also recognize obviously that it's only people above 18 and maybe not like the most severe cases of asthma, but kind of the idea is that we wanted to just focus on where there was an issue at all, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Julia. That was an awesome presentation again. Every time you go through this, I think you get better and better at giving it, and I appreciate that. I also wanted to point out and acknowledge that obviously these are not the only environmental threats and environmental justice issues. There are many others that were included in that environmental racism in St. Louis report. However, these issues were some that we know that nature-based solutions can help to ameliorate. And so these are the ones why the Nature Conservancy chose to focus in on these. So how our organization can help within that environmental justice space through nature-based solutions efforts. So just to provide some additional context there.
Yeah, and just to go off of that, this is also, even though we did focus on the region, which I mentioned includes some areas that are more rural, this is an urban project that we want to have nature-based solutions. And so some of that might seem difficult, but the main idea here is that there are solutions that are already underway that are happening specifically in St. Louis City and parts of the county that are still more urban. And those things can be a model for the rest of the city or other parts of the country and whatever else.
Hey, Julia, there's a question in the chat. What are your aspirations for the tool? What are you hoping it will be used for?
Yeah, I mean, having the models in each section or the projects that we're using as examples are kind of our main aspiration for this. Like, we want organizations to come to this and be able to use this to pinpoint like exactly where they want those projects to happen. Obviously, a lot of organizations already do great work and know like where their communities are best served, but this kind of puts a data angle on that and shows exactly where their impact will be highest. We also don't want this to just be for community organizations. We want this to go to lawmakers and legislators. We want this to go to regular people who are interested in volunteering in their community. I kind of skipped over the legislator thing, but I think, as a lot of us know, Cori Bush introduced a environmental justice mapping bill a little while ago. And obviously that's on the federal level, but we think that this can be a really great model for that. And we're definitely already in talks with some other lawmakers who might be able to use something like this for their policies in the future.
Yeah, agreed. We're also in conversations with local municipality leadership, obviously given the influx of federal stimulus dollars in the Recovery Act. There's a big opportunity within the guidelines for those, the American Rescue Plan Act funds for investments in green infrastructure. So we're hoping that this tool can help to guide where some of those resources can land on the ground.
Another question we have in the chat, I'm sorry, my is I lost it. Can the person have in the chat repeat that? Okay, the question I have again, I'm sorry about that, is how will the tool be updated to stay current?
So that's kind of the big question that we're always thinking about. So we recognize that a lot of this data, like even now, since we put it together originally, could be out of date. It might be like small things that change here and there, but obviously this is always changing. We are working, there are hypothetically ways that like some of this data could be automatically updated. It's definitely not the most reliable. Also, like from a personal note, like I worked for TNC last summer, and then again this past semester, I like took this semester off and worked with them full time. And so it was definitely a big undertaking to create it, and hopefully updating it won't take that long. But it's possible that TNC will hire subcontractors at regular intervals to update it, or they'll continue to be in contact with people who can update themselves. Yeah, again, it's something that a bunch of organizations that we worked with who are creating maps like this, they all have that question and are still working on it. Like the Vacancy Collaborative, they're trying to automate their map, but it's taken them quite a few years to figure that out. And so the answer, like the hard answer to that is future subcontractors. But the more nuanced answer is we're still thinking about it.
Okay, thanks. Another question we have was, what surprised you most as you did this work?
That's a good question. I mean, I think we all kind of know that there is an insane level of segregation in St. Louis. And so I don't think that particularly was surprising, but I think it was definitely surprising that it was on literally every single indicator. And then specifically when we did the population statistics, that was eye-opening for me. I'll actually show an example, which I kind of skimmed over in the park access section. So here, when you can click and see the 5 different categories of populations impacted by park access, we did population statistics here to see the white share and the POC share for each of those 5 categories. Like, you know, these are the populations served in each of those like colored areas. And the trend is like essentially linear. Like as quality of parks goes up, there are fewer people of color in those areas. And then as quality of parks goes down, there are fewer white people in those areas, which is insane that it's not just like a black and white, like here's one area, like it is on every single level, even in like those middle quality areas. There's really no difference in any of these indicators. Like it's all the same, which I think is something that hopefully will open people's eyes and bring some funding into these areas for these projects and stuff like that. Becca, I don't know if you have another answer to that question, because I think it's a good question for both ends of this.
Yeah, I think one of the, well, there were a number of things that I didn't think would come as like as big of a surprise. We kind of knew, just given the current state of affairs and situation and all the other reports that have come out in St. Louis pointing to these issues. But honestly, like, I think the fact that we got such an amazing tool from like what began as an internship was the thing that I was most pleasantly surprised with. Julia is amazingly talented, as you all have seen, and she did such a great job with this project. And so that was definitely something that I was very pleasantly surprised with.
So another question from the chat, it's kind of a two-parter. Can you talk a little bit about how the project evolved? How did your storyboard plan out what maps you wanted, and what data you needed, and where did you find this data? And what changed as things started to crystallize? It's a very long question, so it's in the chat, and I may do it injustice.
Yeah. Yes, I'll try to get to all those. So how the project evolved, like Becca mentioned, I started working on this project because like Karen, who's on the call, a GIS professor at WashU, mentioned that someone in the environmental studies department knew someone who like wanted to make something like this, and they wanted to like kind of just explore the idea of it. And COVID hit, and so I had some free time, so I was like, yeah, I'll just help you like figure out what data is available for this. And then that turned into a summer internship, and then that turned into working in the spring, and then that turned into this. And so that's how it evolved from like a working perspective. From a data perspective and like a storyboard planning out maps perspective, we started by pretty much just looking at, I think, air, flood, and parks. That was mainly just because those were things that like I had done before with GIS, and things that TNC had been working on projects for. And then so for air, I mentioned it was that intersection method. I essentially just found a bunch of different things that like I knew in the back of my mind impacted air quality. I didn't know yet about like vacancy and demolition challenges, so that came later. Working with all the community partners came later for some of the other indicators. But it really just started as like, okay, what data is available? How can we incorporate this? There were some things throughout that we like wanted to include and then didn't, because it didn't like affect as much as we thought after like doing more research. Also things that like, I didn't mention this, but like toxic waste is somewhat included in the interactive tool. You can go and see where Superfund sites are in the region, and then like what populations are impacted by high densities of Superfund sites. So that ended up coming out of the story map, but like we wanted to include that because it came up with a community partner. Yeah, so there was a lot of like each section went through a lot of different iterations. The data, in terms of the data, most of this is publicly accessible. You know, whether from the census or from the city or county of St. Louis. A lot of things came from like research sites, like I mentioned, Policy Map for the asthma data. Some of the data came from community partners themselves, like, you know, the addresses and stuff like that. So it's all over the place. Most of it is publicly accessible. The flood data is not. The flood data is, we're under contract with Fathom, the organization that runs the data. And so if there ever was a partner who wanted to use this data for something, they would not be able to access the flood data, but you can still obviously view it on the interactive tool. Cassie, does that answer most of your questions? I hope so.
Okay, another question we had in the chat is, did some of the data come from the US EPA Enviro Atlas?
Yes, it did. The EPA's Enviro Atlas and EJ Screen are two tools that we consulted. They somewhat have different indicators, but again, if partners wanted to use this data and like worked with TNC to access it, EJ Screen and Enviro Atlas data is included in that, so people can like compare and work with those tools separately.
Okay. Do you know of any other urban areas that have this type of tool?
So like Becca mentioned, the model for this was Bridgeport, Connecticut. They also did the story map component here. They mostly did, they also, I think, just did the three categories. They did air, flood, and park. So that was kind of a model here. I don't think there are any other TNC tools like this, but there are like other organizations. I'm forgetting the name right now, but there's a consulting firm that kind of does environmental justice mapping like this. And the project that they work on is, I think, in, I don't know, a dozen cities across the country or something like that. I don't know, Becca, if you remember the name, if you want to throw it in the chat or talk about that. Greenlink
Yeah.
Equity Map, thank you.
Is the consultancy firm. And then there are other cities who have done, have conducted green prints, which some of you might be familiar with, that include different factors. So this was a co-created process. So since we were working closely with organizers and we're building off of the environmental racism in St. Louis report, our factors or indicators that we included differ from kind of the traditional green prints. But if you want to look into those, there are green prints out there for other urban areas.
And another question we had in the chat was, how is the TNC going to use the data to drive projects and strategic planning?
Great question. Thanks for that, Cassie. We are we have projects underway that were outlined in the report or in the story map as Julia moved through it, which are massive undertakings. So the Green Schoolyard project, which was in the indicator for flooding, for example, the pilot is at Frable Elementary in the Gravois Park neighborhood, but that's just the first of many, and we're in conversations with St. Louis Public Schools and have used similar indicators to develop an equity-based prioritization of potential future SLPS sites in the future, where there's heavy flooding, where there are high rates of youth and asthma, for example. So we're using this data to help kind of guide where we might prioritize the next green schoolyard, for example, once we get through the pilot phase at Frable. And then in the air quality intersection, one of the stories that was mentioned was this developing community-based air quality monitoring program. We're in partnerships with Metropolitan Congregations United and WashU's department and the J. Turner Lab to work collectively to site air quality monitors so that we can help to fill kind of the data gap that exists. Like, this is a model. It doesn't tell us what pollutants are out there or where they're coming from. And so kind of in that same fashion, collectively working with different stakeholders to address some of these issues. I hope that helps to answer the question.
Another question we have in the chat is, do you have thoughts on how ecological researchers might use this tool in their work?
Yeah, so a lot of this is definitely urban based and things that like might not jump out as important for like ecological research. But I do think that knowing that these risks are out there and kind of like being able to work around and like know other projects that could happen, I think is important. I also think specifically the flood section might be important because that is a model that doesn't just focus on St. Louis City, and a lot of the areas with the highest flood risk are like out in the county, like where Tyson is, for example. And so I think that there are definitely opportunities there.
Is this tool already public or live?
Not yet. I will be sure to let everyone know when it does go public. The hard deadline, I think, is August 23rd. So by then.
Yeah, we're working on basically a communications plan and press release, for this to go out so that it can reach as many people as we're hoping it does. But yeah, definitely Julia will be the first to be clued in when it does go live finally.
So someone asked in the chat also, if we were interested in some of the data before then, can we email you?
Yeah, you can email me. There's some information and some data that we can share. The Fathom data we can't share. So yeah, just reach out and Julia's developed kind of a repository for us that we can go through to share some of the layers.
Rebecca, can you talk a little about how you envision receiving support to amplify the fact that, that the resources exist? Like, what can people do, or what can you do, or what are you going to do to kind of like promote this resource?
Oh, thanks for asking. Yeah, I mean, once it goes live, there'll be a shareable link that will have the tool and the story map inside it. And if you want to share that within your networks, I know WashU is connected to a lot of people. And so I think sharing, how you see this tool being useful to guide your own individual work, like within different departments, for example, or just the fact that the tool exists and could be used as a reference and resource to help address some of these issues. Kind of just spreading the word, I think, would be really helpful. And obviously, if you wanted to use it to prioritize some of WashU's efforts, that's great too. I mean, we're already working with folks in the environmental studies department, Jay Turner's lab, as I mentioned. I think there are ways that this could help to plant some seeds for some needed research support as well.
So the question is, can we book a presentation for a Tyson seminar for summer 2022?
I think is that a Julia question? I'm happy to do it. I want Julia's the best representation for this tool. She worked very hard to put it together. I'm happy to join and support her in that if she would like to continue to give presentations on this.
For sure, I'm there.
Thanks for letting me put you all on the spot with that.
With a few minutes left and for our hour's up. Any more questions for Julia or Rebecca? Okay. Well, if there are no more questions, I want to thank Julia and for presenting. It was great information. I'm sure it'll be very useful for everyone in the future. Thanks, Rebecca, for presenting and answering questions for us. This was great. And also I have the recording of this, and so I will email it to people who need it. Just shoot me an email and I can send it to you once I download it. Anything else?
I quickly also just want to thank Brandon, who's on the call from TNC. All of this would not be possible without him. He's been on the team the whole time and huge help. So thank you to Brandon.
Thanks to Brandon. All right. Bye, everyone. It was great seeing everyone, and thanks so much.
Thank you.